Hello and welcome to our Unit 8 lecture. We will be looking at structured programs. We'll go a little more into structured programs. Last unit we talked about how all programs use sequential statements, conditional statements, and loops, those three basic structures, to write programs of hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, or millions of lines of code. There's a little more to it than that. Code gets broken into larger chunks called objects that have more complexity to them, but even in object-oriented code and other more complex coding languages, these three basic structures, sequential, loops, and conditions, are the foundation of programming. So we've covered those in previous units, and now we're using these structures together to solve some more complex problems. So let's look here at some of our options. You're going to do three programs for your homework in this unit. One from Box Office Mojo, you see the title across the top of your document. One, Olympic averages, and one, a Las Vegas dice game. So let's start with the Box Office Mojo, and I think this is actually kind of fun and interesting. If you Google search top grossing movies worldwide in 2016, if you put that into a Google search, the first link there, that's not a paid link, will pull up from the Box Office Mojo site the 2016 worldwide grosses. And it's a long list. It's got how many on here, right? It's got the top, I guess it's all the movies. We don't need all the movies, but I want to grab the first 15 or so. So I'm going to highlight the first 15, which takes us down through X-Men Apocalypse. And then I'm going to copy that and paste that into Excel. Now, when we're in Excel and we're pasting this, Excel will give us two options, the keep source formatting and the match destination formatting. We want to do the match destination formatting and then probably resize some of these columns to fit the data that's inside of them, to auto-fit it, which I did by highlighting the cells that I wanted to auto-fit. I'm not doing column A because it's worldwide gross. If I auto-fit it, it'll scoot way over to the right. But all these other cells, highlight all the cells and then click on the right bar or the bar between B and C, and it'll auto-fit to them. So very easily we have this nice looking collection of our data from the spreadsheet, from the website, Box Office Mojo website, into our spreadsheet. And you can see that Captain America Civil War was number 1, Rogue Story number 2, Finding Dory number 3 in terms of the worldwide gross. And here they are in millions of dollars. So this one was 4 of them made over $1 billion, 1,000 millions. And the domestic gross and the overseas gross for each of these, and the percentage domestic gross of the worldwide and the percentage of overseas from the worldwide. So we have this data, and we want to figure out what are the totals. Now I could do it in my head, or I could do the math in my with a calculator, or I could write some VBA code that's going to do those averages for me. Now if I have a spreadsheet, I admit on a spreadsheet I could do a sum or an average function, but every time you program, you don't have access to a spreadsheet. That's one of the unusual things about doing VBA programming, is we can do it in code by going into the developer tab and coming over here. Let's write this code inside of a module. Right. So I could do this in the, make this window a little smaller here so it fits in our recording space. In VBA, I can use Excel commands, but in Java or C++ or Perl or some other programming language, we don't have access to the spreadsheet. We only have the code. So if we can do this in code here, we can do it in any programming language. If we're using Excel, we're kind of cheating if we were to move to another programming language. So let's write a subroutine here. And actually, I think I have this code for us in our document for doing this. So here we see where we imported the code. And here on page, what is this, page 3, I've got the code for the box office mojo. And if we look at this, we can see that we're going to declare 4 variables, a worldwide gross and an overseas gross, and these are declared as doubles because they're going to have decimal places. Could have used currency, but it's very common to use integer, double, and string as our 3 variable types that'll get us through almost every program we're going to write in this class. Count is an integer. It's going to be how many records are there. 15, 7, 21. How many records are we doing for our average? And then the row tells us what row we're currently processing. So worldwide gross starts off at 0, overseas gross gets initialized to 0, and count gets initialized to 0. The row gets set to 9 because in our spreadsheet, row 9 is the first row that has the data that we're going to process. So this 9 here is the reason why we have row set to 9 in our code. And then we have a do loop that allows us to do a block of code an unknown number of times. 4 loops are good when you know how many times you're going to do something, 5 times or 10 times. A do loop allows you to repeat until some condition is satisfied, and it may take 2, 3, 5, or 500 times to satisfy that condition. In this case, the condition is until we find a blank row in column 2. So we're going to process this data in column 2, this data, this data, this data, this data, this data, this data. Row keeps going 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, rows 22, rows 23. And finally, when rows 24, column B, or the second column, is blank, and that's what gets us out of the loop. So that's this test here, until cells, whatever the current row is, comma, the second column, or column B, is equal to a blank. When it's not blank, we keep repeating, and when it is blank, that's when we exit the loop. So what is the body of the loop doing for each of those values? Well, what we're doing for each of those is saying the worldwide gross is equal to the worldwide gross plus. So we're using this as an accumulator variable or a bucket, and we keep throwing values into it to get this accumulation. We're doing cells at the current row, comma 4. So the current row, when row is 9, column 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So this cell is row 9, column 4. We're taking that value as the value we place into the bucket. Cells sub row, current row, comma, column D, or column 4. We're adding that to the worldwide gross. And then the overseas gross accumulator variable, overseas gross equals overseas gross plus something, is the current row 7th column. So current row, column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right there it is. The 7th column is in fact the column that has the overseas percentages. So we're adding up the worldwide gross into a worldwide gross accumulator variable. We're adding up the overseas gross into an overseas gross accumulator variable. We have a counter variable, count equals count plus 1. So that's a special type of accumulator called an incrementer, where we're adding 1 to it every time. So yeah, it's a bucket, but we keep putting 1s in the bucket, so it's counting for us, basically. And we're going to use that total and count to figure out the average. If you want to know an average, it's the total divided by the count. So we're going to get the averages here when we're done. The other thing we're doing inside the body of the loop is we're saying row equals row plus 1, because we want the row to go from 9 to 10 and then process the worldwide and overseas for Rogue Story. And then row equals row plus 1, row's now an 11, and we process Finding Dory worldwide and overseas. And row equals row plus 1, 11 becomes 12, Zootopia. Row equals row plus 1, 13, Jungle Book, right? So that's why row equals row plus 1, so that our loop is processing through all of these. And then at some point, row becomes 24. The value in row 24 is blank, and that's what gets us out of the loop. When we finish the loop, we put into the spreadsheet using the cells format, the cells formula, at row plus 1. Now row is already a blank row at this point. That's what got us out of the loop. And then we say plus 1 to go down 1 more row, right, down here to 25. So 2 rows below the data, over 4. So right here, we're going to put the average of the worldwide. which is the worldwide gross divided by count. And then row plus 1 over 7, which would be here, column G, we're going to do overseas gross divided by the count. That'll give us the average. Okay, so if I type this code in, and I'll do that, I'll pause it so I can type it in real fast and then pull it back up here. Oh, but before I write the code here, let me do this. I'm going to trigger this code with a macro button. So let me add that macro button. In the developer tab, I'm going to say insert, and the very first top left option is a button, a form button. Right? So I'm going to paint this or just draw where I want it to appear, and it'll give me this button. And I can use the default name button to click, or I can use the preferred name, which coming from our code here is called Box Office Mojo. So I'm going to use that name, Box Office Mojo. Remember, the name for your subroutines is the same as your variable name rules. Can't have spaces. Begin with a letter, letters, digits, and underscores only. Okay. Can't be a reserved word, a word that appears in blue when we write our code. But that can't be spaces. So it's Box Office Mojo with no spaces. And then I say new, and it creates that routine for me, Box Office Mojo. And then I'll just type in that code real quick. And there, I've typed in the code straight from our document. Right, so I've just typed in this code right here. It's always a good idea to put option explicit one time at the top of the module. You don't repeat option explicit, it only appears once. And that will run for me now whenever I click this Box Office Mojo. Now back in my spreadsheet, I created this macro button. By default, it called it button 2. I'm going to right click on that and edit the text and call this Box Office Mojo. Now I can use spaces here. I can't have spaces in the subroutine name, but it's perfectly fine to have white space in carriage returns in the button text. So when I click this button, and I'll confirm this by right-clicking and saying assign macro and just saying yes, it's already assigned to Box Office Mojo. I don't know why it's giving me that extra thing there. So let me right-click this and assign macro to the Box Office Mojo and say OK. Sorry. So that was the name of the routine. And I click the button, it triggers the Box Office Mojo subroutine, and I get my worldwide average here and my overseas average there. Now what's cool about this is every time I click the Box Office Mojo, it starts at row 9, goes down to a blank, and does the average. If I were to delete some of this data, so just the top 10 records, and I say run the code, it gives me the average of the top 9 in this case. I actually deleted one extra one. Right, so 952 million, 0.73 million is the average worldwide gross of the top 9 movies, and 571.87 million is the average of the overseas average of the top 9 movies. And if I want to do the top 5 movies, right, it's over $1 billion average worldwide for the top 5 movies, and over $600 million average for the overseas top 6 movies of worldwide grosses in 2016. So nice little program there, kind of interesting and fun and cool to get your hands on real data. Any real data you have on the internet, you can grab it, pull it into a spreadsheet, and start processing it, and write VBA code for it to do interesting things to that data. So that's described here in the first 4 pages of your document. That's your first homework problem. You're going to revise that slightly for your homework problem. Let's jump down and do this now. I'm going out of order here just a little bit. I'm going to jump down to page 9 and talk about your homework. Just remember to put option explicit one time at the top of your editor window. Be sure to save it in XLSM format, your name, and VD8. That should say homework 8. It helps me to put all the grading in one file. You don't have to do that. You can help other students, but don't share files. And now here's your 3 homework problems. Box Office Mojo revised. So type in the code that I showed you, and is in your document, but add this column for domestic totals, because right now your program is only doing worldwide totals and overseas totals. Add this domestic column total. So I haven't given you the code for doing that, but you should be able to modify the code that I gave you so that you can figure out the domestic totals. Your second homework problem, I'm not giving you any code at all. This is completely a problem description, and you need to write this code on your own. So this will take a little more thinking on your part than some of the homework problems where I've just said copy this code from the book, but I think that's good, right? So here's the problem: Olympic average. An Olympic average is when you drop the highest and lowest scores before calculating the average of the remaining scores. It's a way to minimize the effect of outlier or noisy data. In the case of the Olympics, we do this because sometimes countries are biased in their judging and they shouldn't be. Famously, the Russians did this with Olympic skating. So by doing Olympics, the Olympics use this outlier remover average, where you take the highest and you take the lowest out of the formulas completely, and then you do an average on the remaining values. Add those up and divide by how many there are. So do Olympic average. You're going to write a program that has 5 scores and gives the Olympic average. I want you to report on the lowest score and the highest score, and then the average of the remaining scores. So if the scores were 7, 5, 30, 5, and 10, the lowest score is one of the 5s is the lowest score. It doesn't matter which one, but a 5 is the lowest score, and the 30 is the highest. So if we take out one of the 5s and the 30, you're left with 5, 7, 10. So 5 is the lowest, 30 is the highest, and the average of 5, 7, 10 is 7.33. Okay, so write that program. Use column A as descriptive text so the user knows what they're typing in. In column B, use cells B2 to B6 to enter the data, and then put the minimum, the maximum, and the average, the Olympic average, not the regular average, in column in cells B8, B9, and B10. Use a macro button here inside your program. So in my spreadsheet, I've got this program for sheet 1. I'm going to rename this sheet Box Office Mojo. And then I'm going to add a new sheet here. I'm going to rename this Olympic Average. I'm not doing a good job spelling. And sorry, no, it doesn't matter, but I want to spell better if I can finally get it done. I've got data here in this sheet, and my code for Olympic average, I don't want it to accidentally write over the Box Office Mojo code. So what you can do is you can, again, put a macro button into your code here. We'll call this okay. So this Olympic average, and then I'll rename it. But by having this macro here, when I go to the code, this Olympic average, where's my Olympic average at? Well, that was interesting. Did it not create? So I don't have anything in the sheet code, and that's right, I'm just confirming this. All my code, this first module, I think since I had created the module manually when I added the macro button, I think it's why I have 2 modules here. But I did not get the subroutine for Olympic average. Let me try that again. Assign macro, Olympic average new. Okay, there it goes. I don't know why it didn't do it last time. But it's created this sub for me, and it's associated this sub so that as I write code here, and if I say something like cell sub 5, 6 equals hello, it's going to do that on this sheet. Picked a bad place to do that because I actually had down 5/6 covered by my button. But I'm doing it on this sheet and not on the Box Office Mojo sheet. So the Box Office Mojo macro button is updating the Box Office Mojo sheet, and the Olympic average macro button is updating data on the Olympic average sheet. So that's a good way to have all this code on the same in the same file, but not overwriting each other. So getting back to our program here, have a macro button. It actually says in the directions, determine Olympic average is the name you want it to be. So if I really want to follow the directions here, I will rename this, right click, edit text, determine Olympic average. And then the actual code for doing this under developer Visual Basic is not going to be hello 11, but it's going to be whatever we do there. Okay, and I'm not giving you this code, so I'm not going to write any code here in the video either. I just want you to try to think about that. It's easy to describe. You've got 5 input values. You have to find the minimum value. You have to find the maximum value. You've already kind of done that before if you go back to when we started talking about if statements. And then you have to figure out the average of the 3 middle values. And if I gave you a hint, the only hint I might give you is that figuring out the total of the 3 middle values might be as easy as figuring out the total of the 5 values and then subtracting a couple values. Right? So that's the only hint I'm going to give you, and I'll let you work on that homework problem. Now, your third homework problem is Vegas Dice. Write code to implement the Vegas Dice program described on pages 5 through 8 of this document. Use message box statements to display information to the player. Look at the code on the bottom of page 5. Let's go back up to page 5 now. So here we are on page 5, Las Vegas Dice game. Craps is one of the most popular Vegas casino games. It involves a player rolling 2 dice and betting on the results. The basic rules of the game appear in the box below. A roll means throwing 2 dice and adding the results. So the lowest you can get is if you roll 2 1s, and the highest you can get is you get 2 6s and some value in between. So whenever you do a roll, it's going to be 2 random values from 1 to 6 added together, and the result is going to be something between 2 and 12. The game begins with the first roll, and the rules for the first roll, if you roll a 7 or an 11, you win, and the game's over. If you roll a 2, 3, or a 12, you lose, and the game's over. If the first roll is something else besides 7, 11, or 2, 3, 12, if it's any of those other values, then the game enters a loop, and you keep rolling until 2 conditions get you out of this loop. If you roll a 7, then you lose. If you roll the first roll again, then you win. Okay, so that maybe sounds complicated, but those are the rules, and you can go back to them. Some examples might help. Here's some code you can look at before we get to the examples. Subroutine Vegas Dice. First roll's an integer, new roll's an integer, so we have 2 variables for that first roll, and then if we don't win the game on the first roll, we go into a loop of making new rolls until we get an exit the loop condition. And that first roll, the way we do it is we use the worksheet function random between. So the Excel function rand between allows you to have 2 arguments, and it'll give you a random value between and including those 2 values. If I say 1 to 6, I'll get a random value that's either 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. And I'm going to do random 1 to 6 plus random 1 to 6 because I'm rolling dice 1, which is a 1 to 6 value, and dice 2, which is a 1 to 6 value. You don't want to say random 2 to 12 because that actually is not the same thing. We'll talk about why maybe later. But if you think about it, you should realize that rolling 2 dice, you're much more likely to roll a 7 than you are a 12. But if you say random 2 to 12, you would have just your percentages of a 2, a 7, and a 12 would all be equal. So this is actually simulating 2 dice much better. You have to say worksheet function dot in front of any existing Excel function like rand between or max or min or anything like that. And we're going to save that sum into the variable first roll and then message box that out. Player's first roll is. And then we test. First roll 7 or first roll 11? If so, then message box, winner on the first roll, congratulations. Else if, well, what if the first roll is a 2 or a 3 or a 12? In that case, message box, sorry, you lost on the first roll. Better luck next time. Else, if it's not a win or a loss, then you're going into a do loop where you roll a new dice, make a new roll, and do the appropriate test to see if it's a win or a loss or if you repeat the loop. So that's the idea, and I'm stopping the code here that I give you so that you can work on this. So here's some sample runs. Here's a simple run where you win on the first roll. Let's play the Vegas dice game. Okay, the message pops up, player's first roll is 7. Okay, the message pops up, winner on the first roll, congratulations. Here's a sample run where you lose on the first roll. Let's play the Vegas dice game. Okay, player rolls, first roll's a 2. Okay, according to our rules, if you roll a 2, 3, or a 12, you lose on the first roll, so you lost on the first roll. Going to the next page, here's a multi-line where it spans a little more space. Let me make this a little slightly smaller so it all fits. Let's play the Vegas dice game. Player rolls an 8. Now you have to roll an 8 again to win. New rolls a 4. Roll again. If you roll a 7, you lose. If you roll an 8, you win. That's how this game is going to end. Roll a 6. Have to roll again. Roll an 8. Aha! I re-rolled the initial roll. Player wins. And then the next page shows an example multi-line, a multi-roll game where you lose. Let's play Vegas dice. Start off with rolling a 6. Now you have to roll a 6 to win. You must roll a 6 to win. 7 will lose. 6 will win on a multi-roll game. 9, roll again. 7, that's the condition that gets you out of the do loop with a loss. Player loses. Okay? So that's the Vegas dice game. This is probably going to be one of the hardest programs you've written potentially at this point. It might come really easy to you, and if it does come really easy to you, let me encourage you to work on the bonus here. If it doesn't come really easy to you, try it, work on it. There's not much code there. You just have to basically put a do loop at the end of the code I gave you as a starter code and think through how to make that work. But it's a neat program. You're simulating playing the Vegas dice game. The optional +1 bonus, so if this made sense to you and came easy to you, then revise it so that instead of using message box outputs, you're outputting the data onto a spreadsheet. So here's what it looks like. Instead of message boxes, you're saying, let's play the Vegas dice game. Player's first roll is a 7. Winner on the first roll, congratulations. Let's play the Vegas dice game. First roll is an 8. You must roll an 8 to win. Next roll is a 7. You lost. Right? So you can see here, we're doing the exact same logic. We're just replacing message boxes with messages to or data inside the spreadsheet cells. And as a little bit of a hint here, I've added a new variable called row count so that I know what row the output's going on. Start off row count equals 1 because that's where I want the first line of output to appear. Cells sub row count. Cells sub row count. So the first row, column A. Let's play the Vegas dice game, and then row count equals row count +1. That's the thing you have to remember, is you have to update that row count variable so that the next line of output appears on the next row, and then the next line appears on the next row. So every time I output a message, player's first roll is first roll, I have to update the row count variable so that the next cells sub row count, comma 1 is on the next line. So that'll be +1 extra credit. Again, if you can get the if you get the first version of this to work and it makes sense to you, try to impress me. Go ahead and see if you can map that over to the Excel spreadsheet to get your program to work. Let me show you what this will look like. I think I've got a saved copy of this solution. Let me pull that up and show you. So here's what it looks like if you're doing the extra credit version. you hit the button and it gives you the results. So if I rolled a 7, then you win on the first roll. 7s are good on the first roll, they're bad on subsequent rolls. This time I play the game, first roll is a 10, 10 is a win, 7 is a loss, multi-roll. 8, roll again, 7, we lost. Delete that, play again. 5's the point, or the first roll. 4, 7, player loses. So I can keep doing this right here and see what's going on. 7 on the first roll is a win. 8, and then I rolled 8 again, player wins. Roll a 6, now 6 is my point. Roll a 7, 7 is a loss. So that's the extra credit +1 version, and the dialog box version is like you saw in the handout in pages 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, good luck with that. If you have any questions, of course, shoot me an email. Let me know how things are going, and have a great day.